Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. I wanted to talk this week about Bill C4, which is in the Senate. And this was one of the bills that came out very early on after Carney won the election, which was about the GST cut for first-time home buyers, which is fine, which is great. Mike Moffat is very happy with that. Could be more in his estimation, but there we are. But then the government did something else to this bill, and they attached a whole other component to it, which is about the privacy obligations for political parties when it comes to personal data. It has nothing to do with the GST on new homes, but they added it to this bill anyway for no good reason in particular. And the reason that this has come up is because there's a court challenge going on in BC right now where the province's privacy commissioner said, all of this data that political parties are gathering, well, we think that should fall under our provincial privacy regime. And the federal government was like, or not the federal government, but all federal parties were like, no, sir, I don't like it. And so this bill is about asserting federal paramountcy for political parties. So federal political parties will fall under federal privacy regulations, but it's also saying that the only obligations they have as federal political parties is to have a privacy policy. That's it. It doesn't go into any safeguards or any recommendations or minimum standards that any of these parties need to have. No, they simply just need to have a policy, and that's all it tells them to do. And then that the provinces can't challenge it under their provincial privacy codes because it falls under they explicitly put it under the federal regime, but also not in a way that the federal privacy commissioner can do anything about it either. So it's a really weird kind of a way of going about this, and it's also just a tiny bit hypocritical when at the same time as they are working on other privacy legislation under the federal regime, which will strengthen the existing system. They're also giving themselves an out, and all of the parties are on board with this because they don't want to have very many restrictions when it comes to how they use and collect personal data. And we've seen political parties absolutely hollow themselves out in order to acquire this personal data. The fact that the Liberals essentially did away with the grassroots memberships where you had to buy them in exchange for simply having people sign up and populate their database is a sign of just how desperate parties are to get this kind of information, that they would absolutely, tear apart their entire organizational structure just to make it easier for people to give them their data. That gives you a sense of how valuable they find this, and for them to then turn around and say, well, we don't need to give ourselves any safeguards around this privacy, around this private data, is a problem. And it's one that no one in any of the parties has put their hand up and said, we think this is a problem. We should probably put some rules around ourselves so that we don't abuse this data that people are giving to us for our purposes, which is where the Senate has now come in. Now, this bill sat in the House of Commons for 6 months, and right before Christmas, the very afternoon before they rose, it passed the House of Commons, and they sent it up to the Senate, and the Senate is actually looking at those privacy sections of the bill for the first time because nobody bothered in the House of Commons because they were all on board with giving themselves the laxest possible privacy rules possible. So now we have senators who are it's not even sober second thought, as someone was saying. It's like actual first thought, because nobody bothered to examine these sections. So they're having to pick up the pieces and do it. And they are now also debating how much they should flex their muscles on this, because this is pretty egregious. The parties in the Commons have all given themselves a pass, so there's no accountability for any of this. And now you are leaving it up to the appointed independent senators to put the brakes on and say, whoa, we really should look at the privacy implications when we allow parties to use this data indiscriminately. And they're debating on how they're exactly going to go about doing this. There is the suggestion that they could split the bill and pass the portion with the GST cut and send that on its merry way, and then spend more time and possibly send more amendments for the privacy portion, because again, it was wholly unexamined in the Commons side, and they feel it's necessary that MPs should put rules around how their parties use your personal data. And this is kind of where things are sitting. We're going to see some back and forth around this. There's going to be some real deliberation in the Senate around how do they go about trying to fix a problem that the MPs created for themselves, and with the interests of Canadians in mind, with the fact that their personal data is being mined and exploited by political parties, and they are ensuring that there are no rules around how they do that. So this is a perfect example for why an appointed Senate like ours has its merits, where the part of being sober second thought is sober in that you are not worried about electoral calculations. You are not worried about the machinations of a political party, and you are looking at it from a much more objective policy lens, in terms of you are asking for this personal data of Canadians, and you are giving yourself, ensuring that you do not have to put safeguards around it. And that, I think, is a perfectly good and legitimate use for the Senate's powers. The Senate does have an unlimited veto. It's very, very rare that they will ever exercise it, because they know that they're not the elected body. But sometimes, every now and again, they need to flex that muscle and say, whoa, you guys have gotten this completely wrong, and we don't have to pass this like this. Now, it'll depend on how much of a stink the government raises in terms of, I don't think it would quite rise to the level of a constitutional crisis, because it's not like it's a budget bill. But I think this is somewhere where the Senate is going to have to actually flex its muscles and tell MPs that it's not okay for them to give themselves the powers that they are looking for when it comes to the use and collection of personal data from Canadians, with no safeguards and no rules around it. And we'll see where this winds up going. I think it's going to be a very interesting few weeks in the Senate as this bill makes its way through this final process. But I think it's an important thing that we keep an eye on. And I think it's important that we kind of tell the parties that it's not okay for you to harvest this data and use it with no safeguards. This is not the 70s. It's not the 80s. This data matters. It's clearly valuable to them. So they need to treat it like it is that valuable, and put safeguards around it. So we'll see if the senators can get enough intestinal fortitude to make this happen. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at journo_Dale on Twitter and journodale_no_ on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.